In 1969, a band from Britain recorded one of the most important albums in rock history. In the Court of the Crimson King would go on to sell millions of copies across 5.5 decades. It would influence virtually every major progressive rock group that followed it. It would be cited by musicians from Brian Eno to Tom York as a defining record. And for over 30 years, the original master tapes were missing. Not stolen, not destroyed, filed away, incorrectly cataloged, sitting in a record company archive, untouched since the night the album was mixed in 1969. Every vinyl pressing, every cassette, every CD remaster sold in those 30 years had been sourced not from the original recordings, but from a copy. A second-generation corrected tape that engineers had used as a stand-in when nobody could locate the real thing. The story of those tapes is the story of King Crimson's relationship with the music industry in miniature. Extraordinary work, created with extraordinary care, then handed into a system that promptly lost it. Not out of malice, but out of indifference. What we are going to examine today goes beyond missing tapes. It is the story of 23 years of legal warfare waged by one musician against a succession of record companies. Disputes so prolonged they outlasted the companies themselves, in at least 2 cases outlasted the artists, and at one point caused the complete professional retirement of the man at the center of it all. His name is Robert Fripp.
In 2012, 6 years of dispute and wrangling with the Universal Music Group came to an end. This ending 21 years of ongoing dispute and litigation, stemming back to my former managers in 1991.
To understand why the dispute began, you have to understand what Robert Fripp thought he was signing in 1969. EG Music was set up as a management company with an unusual philosophy: artists and managers as genuine partners, not as product and vendor. Fripp believed in it. For roughly 2 decades, the arrangement worked. But from the beginning, the legal structure of that partnership contained a problem. In order for EG to collect royalties, defend copyrights, and promote the catalog internationally, the artists were asked to assign their copyrights to the company. EG would hold the rights, the artists would receive the royalties. That was the deal as it was explained to Fripp. Decades later, Fripp would describe that explanation in much simpler terms. David Enthoven and Sam Alder of EG visited me, and Mr. Alder explained to me I had to assign my copyrights to them so they could collect royalties, defend and promote the material, and, if necessary, defend the copyrights all around the world. In other words, I had to assign them my rights so they could give me royalties. Fripp pauses. Then, this was a lie. The Louder Sound piece, one of the most detailed accounts of the dispute ever published, goes on to document the full mechanism of what EG was doing. Having obtained the artists' copyrights, the company used them as collateral to secure advances from publishers and record labels, advances paid to EG, not to the artists, and then loaned back to the artists with interest. EG was profiting from their own musicians' creative work in multiple directions simultaneously. This continued for roughly 20 years. Then, in 1991, it collapsed.
Going back to, let's say, 1977 to 83, there was a transition between a culture with a market economy to where we are now, where we have a market society.
In 1991, EG's principals made a decision that Robert Fripp did not learn about until after it had been made. They sold the King Crimson catalog to Virgin Records and the publishing arm to EMI. No consultation with the artists, no compensation. The work Fripp had spent 2 decades creating, and the rights he believed were held in partnership had been sold from under him. Fripp's response to this was public, detailed, and unsparing. In a 1994 interview with Mojo magazine, one of the most important music publications of its era, he described what the sale had felt like. The dispute is about EG selling the catalog to Virgin and the publishing company to EMI. I felt a deep sense of personal violation. EG was set up as a partnership between artists and managers, and to see the power and quality of that relationship violated so thoroughly left no alternative. The litigation that followed lasted 6 years and 7 months. During that time, Fripp began dispatching hundreds of written communications to record label executives, lawyers, and journalists, combining legal argument with what one observer described as bitter wit. Copies went to EG, to record company heads, to the music press, and to fellow musicians. It was an unusual tactic. It was also a deliberate one. If the system would not deliver justice privately, Fripp would document the failure publicly. By the time that dispute resolved, Fripp had won, and the catalog had already passed into new hands. The problem had not gone away. It had simply changed address. While the EG litigation ground on through the 1990s, another issue was sitting quietly in a filing cabinet somewhere inside the Virgin Records archive. Nobody knew it was there. It had been there since 1969. When King Crimson recorded In the Court of the Crimson King, the session produced what engineers call a first-generation stereo master, the original direct recording from the mixing board. That tape was filed away immediately after the album was mixed. A second-generation corrected copy was made, and it was that copy, not the original, that was used as the source for every subsequent pressing of the album. Nobody looked for the original. Nobody found it. For over 30 years, every consumer who bought this record in any format, vinyl, cassette, CD, remaster, had been listening to a generation removed from what the musicians and engineers actually created in that room in 1969. The original first-generation stereo masters had been filed away soon after the original 1969 mixdown sessions. These tapes were considered lost until 2003, when they were discovered in the Virgin Records archives, splicing tapes still present between the various songs, the crossfade between I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph yet to be created. The tapes were exactly as they had been left on the night the album was finished, 34 years earlier. The crossfades that appear on the album You Know were applied later, to the copy. The originals had never been touched. A proper remaster using those first-generation masters was released in 2004 as the Original Master Edition. For listeners who have compared the two versions, the difference is not subtle. For the previous 3 decades, nobody in the record industry had thought to ask where the real tapes were. The EG dispute settled in the late 1990s. It should have drawn a line. Instead, it drew a map of everything that still needed to be fought. Through a sequence of corporate acquisitions that is almost impossible to follow without a diagram, the King Crimson catalog had passed through 5 different owners, from EG to Virgin to EMI, through Sanctuary, through BMG, and eventually into the hands of Universal Music Group, the largest record company in the world. Each acquisition transferred not just the recordings, but the contracts and the obligations attached to them. And at each transfer, those obligations were apparently not reviewed. The royalties simply stopped arriving. or arrived at the wrong rate, or arrived for some recordings but not others. Fripp and his team began auditing. The results were consistent. In 2003, we felt we needed to audit EMI. We discovered there had been underpayment to us, and as a result, EMI paid King Crimson and myself £400,000 in 2004. £400,000, found through an audit that should not have been necessary, paid out because the underpayment was incontestable once someone actually checked the numbers. This was not a disputed interpretation of a contract. It was money that was owed and had not been paid. The pattern repeated when UMG acquired BMG. Among the assets UMG inherited were the rights to several albums Fripp had recorded in collaboration with Andy Summers, the guitarist of The Police. Those recordings had generated royalties. Those royalties had not been paid for nearly 3 decades. Universal Music Group's response to Fripp, cited in legal correspondence, was direct. You cannot expect a company the size of UMG to read or apply the details of every contract of every catalog it acquires. Fripp noted, publicly and with characteristic precision, that this explanation did not arrive with a check attached to it. The UMG publishing dispute settled in 2010. The broader dispute with Universal did not. By 2012, Robert Fripp had been in litigation or active dispute with record companies for more than 20 years. The EG case, the EMI audit, the Andy Summers royalties, the wider UMG dispute. Each one had been resolved, slowly, expensively, through audits and legal correspondence and, in some cases, court proceedings, only for the next one to surface. In August 2012, he stopped. Fripp announced his retirement from working as a professional musician in August 2012, citing long-standing differences with Universal Music Group and stating that working within the music industry had become a joyless exercise in futility. A joyless exercise in futility. That is what 23 years of corporate indifference had reduced one of the most creative and intellectually serious guitarists in rock history to. A man for whom making music professionally was no longer worth the administrative cost. He was not ill. He was not creatively exhausted. He was not pursuing other interests. He had been worn down by the machinery that surrounded his work until the work itself was no longer sustainable.
However, today, if I was speaking with the head of Universal Music, and I said, "Dear Mr. Big Cheese of Universal Music, I'm only here to be true to the musical impulse," he would think, this isn't the band for me to sign. And that is, in broad strokes, where we are now.
The retirement lasted 13 months. In a classic rock interview published in 2014, Fripp stated, "From 1991 onwards, I was in dispute, litigation, and dissension with management and record companies. It lasted until last year, when the final major problem with Universal was settled out of court." The settlement came on September 6, 2013. That same day, Fripp announced the return of King Crimson, a 7-piece band, 4 Englishmen and 3 Americans, ready to tour. The 2 events were not coincidental. The settlement was the condition. Without it, there would have been no return. While all of this was happening, while the lawyers were corresponding and the auditors were counting, Fripp had already begun building something different. In 1992, while the EG litigation was still active, he co-founded a record label called Discipline Global Mobile with producer David Singleton. DGM was structured around a principle so simple it sounds almost naive. The artists own their recordings, not the label, not the management company, not the corporate entity that acquired the corporate entity that acquired the original deal. The artists. DGM was founded on the principle that artists should retain ownership of their recordings. As Fripp has stated, the phonographic copyright in these performances is operated by Discipline Global Mobile on behalf of the artists with whom it resides, contrary to common practice in the record industry. Contrary to common practice. That phrase carries the weight of everything we have discussed.
Now, within David and Robert share the same aims. You can go to DGM and see the DGM business aims. You can see the DGM principles of ethical business, which we share.
Copyright residing with the artists, not assigned to a management company, not transferred to a label in exchange for royalties that may or may not arrive, not inherited by a conglomerate that has never read the original contract. With the artists. DGM Live, the label's live recording and archive operation, has released previously unheard material sometimes within days of a performance. There is no vault strategy. There is no withholding material for strategic release windows. When recordings are ready and rights are clear, they come out. How much material from the EG years, the Virgin years, the EMI years remains inaccessible? In archives DGM does not control, under rights that remain unresolved, is genuinely unknown. That is the honest answer. Nobody has published a full inventory. In 2010, Kanye West released a song called Power. It opens with one of the most recognizable riffs in progressive rock history, the 4-bar figure from 21st Century Schizoid Man, King Crimson's 1969 debut track. The sample had not been cleared before the song was uploaded to YouTube, where it accumulated, by the time the legal case was filed, almost 134 million views. When Declan Colgan Music Limited, the company that holds the mechanical rights to the original King Crimson recording, became aware of the sample and contacted Universal Music Group, an agreement was reached. West, UMG, and DCM signed a licensing deal. A 5.33% royalty on each copy of Power that was sold, or, in the contract's language, otherwise exploited. For physical sales, the arrangement worked. For streaming, it did not. Declan Colgan Music Limited claimed in their lawsuit that UMG has failed and continues to fail to comply with its royalty accounting obligations in respect of one mode of exploitation, namely the making available of the Power recording to consumers through so-called streaming services. Instead, according to the suit, UMG had been paying a percentage of what they actually received from platforms such as Spotify, a lower amount than the equivalent payment for CD sales. The gap between those two positions, what a stream pays versus what a physical sale pays, multiplied across hundreds of millions of listens, was substantial enough to take to the High Court in London. The case was filed in March 2022. Robert Fripp watched this unfold. He commented publicly, and his words, posted on Facebook, were characteristically direct. This dispute has been dragging on for several years, unnecessarily. Fripp also noted that two King Crimson members, Greg Lake, who died in December 2016, and Ian MacDonald, who died in February 2022, had both passed away while the case was still unresolved. Greg Lake died in December 2016, Ian MacDonald in February 2022. The royalty dispute over a sample from a song they had played in 1969 was still unsettled when both of them were gone. The case settled out of court before the May 2024 trial date. Declan Colgan Music Limited received payment as part of the agreement. The terms of the settlement have not been disclosed. Another settlement. Another set of undisclosed terms. Another dispute that lasted years longer than it needed to, and that ended without any public accounting of what was owed or what was paid. What remains in the vaults how much King Crimson material exists in private archives, in the custody of companies that may or may not know what they hold, is genuinely unknown. That is not speculation or modesty or a disclaimer. It is the factual condition of the catalog after 55 years of transfers, acquisitions, and disputes. Nobody has published a complete inventory. Fripp has spoken candidly about individual recoveries and losses, but the full picture has never been mapped. DGM continues to release archival material on its own terms, on its own schedule. That is the closest thing to an answer that currently exists. The story of King Crimson and the record industry is, in the end, a story about a system that was not designed with artists in mind, and about what happens when an artist is meticulous enough and patient enough and angry enough to document that failure in exhaustive detail over 23 years. Fripp's answer was a label built on different principles, a succession of audits that forced companies to pay what they owed, a body of written correspondence that made the private conduct of the industry publicly visible, and an insistence, stated clearly, repeated consistently, never abandoned, that the work belonged to the people who made it. The litigation is largely over. The settlements are signed. The tapes, at least some of them, have been found. The music, at least, is still there.